Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, In-Depth DevExtreme ASP.NET MVC and .NET Core Controls presented by DevExpress Technical Evangelist Don Wibier. In this webinar, Don will discuss some more technical topics about DevExtreme like starting a new project and how to incorporate DevExtreme in an existing project, how to work with REST API and the DevExtreme Web API Scaffolders, declaring DevExtreme controls in Razor for ASP.NET MVC and Angular on ASP.NET Core, server-side benefits, ASP.NET Core Spreadsheet, and rich text editor. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today, and we will send the links to the recording in a follow-up email. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Don.
Thanks, Amanda. And again, welcome everybody. Yeah, well, as Amanda mentioned, I'm going to show you a couple of really nice things that come with DevExtreme. And I've put up a small agenda, so we'll have a bit of an outline. And Amanda already mentioned most of it. So let's first start with going through the agenda. I did change a couple of things, but everything is in there. So we'll start by talking about how to incorporate DevExtreme in an existing project, because you probably saw some demos of DevExtreme and you've got this project and you want to use the controls. So how can you do that? How can you start using them? The next topic will be how to start a new MVC DevExtreme project, as well as a .NET Core application as well. I'll show you that. And one of the other things which is very cool, and it's going to save you quite a bit of time, is how to get started with connecting your DevExtreme client-side controls to Web API endpoints and do all kinds of operations with your data through the REST API that will be set up. And we have some very powerful scaffolders to do so. One of the other things I will touch as well is I'm going to talk a little bit about why you should have this server-side implementation of DevExtreme. So how do you declare controls, how can you use type lambdas, and how to use model validation, because DevExtreme again is a full client-side control set. So basically everything is running in your browser and everything is done by JavaScript. And what you'll see in this webinar is that it is really nice how we integrated this server-side versus client-side, and it all works out really well. And that is what you'll see during this webinar. I will also quickly talk about the Office controls that we have. So we already had the rich text editor and the spreadsheet control for ASP.NET, for web forms, for WinForms and WPF, and now we have them out of CTP in DevExtreme as well, which is a really exciting thing because those controls are really powerful. And I will show you how to incorporate them in your own application. And then there is one other item that I decided to add because this is a really nice demo as well. We have in CTP right now our file manager control, and I'll show you while the file manager control is still in CTP, it already has some really powerful features. And one of the other things which is nice to do, because the file manager is not like, it doesn't have the integration layer with MVC or Angular or the other frameworks that we support with DevExtreme. I'll show you how you can use the jQuery implementation as well in your MVC application. So a lot to cover, and then the last item, which is also really, really cool, is our scaffolding tools that we have for DevExtreme with a .NET Core backend, an Angular front end, and that is also a very, very nice feature. So for everybody of you who wants to get started with DevExtreme and Angular, or wants to start with Angular, this is a really good starting point. And for all of you already developing Angular, you'll see that this scaffolding can save you quite a bit of time. So this is another really nice demo that I'll show you at the end of the webinar. And then if there are any questions, we'll deal with that afterwards. So let's get started with the first item in the agenda. And yeah, obviously you might already have a project, like a big project, and you saw a couple of demos of the DevExtreme controls on our website, or maybe you attended to a conference where we were showing off some DevExtreme technology. So yeah, how can you incorporate the DevExtreme library in an existing project and you can start using the controls straight away? Well, for this I will show you two approaches, and that depends slightly on the project type that you're working on. So I have prepared a project in Visual Studio 2017 in this case, which is a normal ASP.NET MVC website running on the .NET framework. And so I actually started the project template that comes with Visual Studio, and if I hit Ctrl F5, we'll have the website just like this. So if we now want to include DevExtreme, that is actually quite simple. I can just right click my mouse button on the project file and I'll click the Add a DevExtreme to the project. I do have to say that if you want to use all the design time features that we offer with DevExtreme, you have to download the DevExtreme package from our website and install it. So we'll install everything properly in Visual Studio and you'll have all the design time features available, like the Add DevExtreme to the project feature. And so now everything is set up into your project, a couple of JavaScript files. We're even creating some DevExtreme bundles, so you'll have a most optimized download when running the application. And once that is all done, we can start using DevExtreme straight away. And we can actually do that by, for instance, putting a DevExtreme color picker on one of the pages, just to show you that everything is set up properly. You'll see that a couple of assemblies have been added to the project, and yeah, a couple of web fonts together with some style sheets for our beautiful theming on the controls. And if I now go to the view, the index view of the home controller here, yeah, I could actually go and, for instance, add something extra here. Let me add a paragraph, and now I can include a DevExtreme control in this way. DevExtreme, and in this case I will go for the color box, and in this case I will just leave it empty. If I now run the application again, you'll see that we have in one of those columns a very beautiful color box from DevExtreme. Here we are, and I didn't initialize it with any color, but as you can see, I can pick a color here, and yeah, this is one of the DevExtreme controls that has been incorporated into an existing project. I will also show you how to incorporate DevExtreme in a different kind of project. And for that I will open up Visual Studio 2019, and in this case I have created a new .NET Core application, and this is not actually an MVC application, but this is based on Eraser Pages, which is like a new thing, and you can tell that by going to the Pages folder. And yeah, what you see here is that there is an index page, and it can be bound to like a view model. In this case it's the index model, But yeah, this is not entirely the MVC design pattern which is implemented in this project, and particularly for DevExtreme projects this is actually not a bad idea, because all the functionality is being done through the DevExtreme controls together with Web API endpoints. So we have a page which will pretty much serve as a container for the DevExtreme controls. But we can also include the DevExtreme very easy here by again right clicking, and I will click the Add DevExtreme to Project, and in this case there are a couple of things slightly different here, and that is also shown because we now have a README file after we included DevExtreme into the project. The most easy way is to change the layout in your view start file to DevExtreme layout. And if I change this one to the DevExtreme layout, then things might work, but I would not go for this one, because if you have your own design and you have your own templates set up, this might not work very well. And that brings us to the second option to complete this inclusion of DevExtreme, and that is updating your existing layout manually. It's actually quite straightforward. For this to work, we will open the index file here, and we obviously also need our layout. So let me go to the shared folder here and open up the layout file. And this is actually the container of all the Razor pages that will be inserted into this sort of master page. There are a couple of things we need to do. First, we have a bunch of scripts which is rendered at the bottom of the page, and I know that according to best practices it is good to do it this way, except by if you want to use DevExtreme, DevExtreme requires you to include all these resources in the head. Otherwise we can't render this stuff. So let me just cut it out of the page, move it to the head, and next I can actually go to the README file again, and I can copy out these items here, because these are all the things that DevExtreme needs to run properly in your browser. If I now switch back to the layout, I can simply paste them in the head as well, like this. There is one thing you should be aware of. jQuery that we include should be removed because that was already included in one of the original scripts here. And well, if you want to tidy it up a bit, you can actually move the CSS files to the rest of the CSS files here, but this is not really a necessity. And so with this in place, I can also go again to the index in this case and start including that same control, the color picker as well. So here is one of the sections that we can use to host that color picker. And I'll pretty much do the same as I did before. So I will call the DevExtreme extension method, and I will select the color box here, just like that. Yeah, and with this in place, I can run the application again. And what you'll see is the newer project template based on the Razor pages, and it also includes the color picker in this area here. And so again, a slightly different mechanism, but also very easy to implement on an existing website. All right, so then if you are in the process of creating a new application, we have something for you as well. And that is even simpler. We have a number of project templates, and the first one I'll show you is in Visual Studio 2019 in this case, and that is, yeah, I just did that. If I go to File, New Project, what we have here is we can look at DevExtreme up. And we can actually do that by selecting the project type. Web, I'll change C#, and we actually have a project type which is called DevExtreme. And so what you see here is we can pick a DevExtreme responsive ASP.NET Core application, and that's a very nice template. I'll show that after the one that I will show first. And we have the DevExtreme ASP.NET MVC 5 application. So let me start with that one. And I will create that right here. And this is an application which is not on .NET Core, but this is just running on the .NET Framework. And yeah, with this, everything is pretty much set up and ready to go. So once everything has been created in the project, we can immediately run the application, and what you'll see once I run the application is that we have a very nice layout, like kind of looks like the same as the MVC template, but it also has a DevExtreme data grid on there, which we can already page and sort and filter. And so this is the first project template that you can use to set up a new application which uses DevExtreme. The second one, and I will show that one again in Visual Studio 2017 to show you that it works there as well. I can actually now go to File, New Project and use the other one. And that is actually the DevExtreme responsive ASP.NET Core application. And as you can see, it will run in 2017 as well. And if I would create this application, what you'll get is a really nice project which uses material design out of the box. And it runs on .NET Core. And well, the project has been set up quite fast. And let me hit Control F5 again to run this application, and you'll see that you have a very good looking starting point for your application. So here, as mentioned, you'll have a beautiful material design website with the data grid. It even has a couple of more features enabled by default, like the page size, and you can again page through the data as well. And it even has the hamburger menu where you can accommodate your navigation of the application. So this is our latest project template, which is, yeah, just really good looking, and you can actually resize it and you'll see that it will remain good looking. In this case, I need to collapse the hamburger menu. Yeah, so this is a full responsive site that you can use for your application. All right, so then the next thing what I'd like to show you is, yeah, how can you connect your controls to a web API backend? Or actually, how can I get data out of my database into that client-side control? Well, for that, we have put together a couple of really nice scaffolders as well, and that is the next demo that I'm going to show you. And I have to say, once you get used to this, it's really a time saver here. Excuse me. So let's get back to the application that I just created. Let's just use that material design website, and Let me add a couple of things here. So I need a database, and I will be using Entity Framework as data access layer. So I will set up a couple of things in this application quite quickly by opening the Package Manager console and scaffold a database that is already installed on my machine. I can just paste this command in. And in this case, I will be using the Chinook database. It's just a sample database that you can find online, and this is just plain and easy to use. With this, the scaffolding of Entity Framework will actually go through the data model of the database, and it will generate my models here, and this is exactly what I need. Next, there are a couple of things I need to tweak here. So I will be dealing with the artist model in this demo, and for some reason the Entity Framework scaffolder didn't include a key field here, and that is something that needs to be available when using the DevExtreme scaffolders. So let me add that key property to artist ID, and I need to set up the DB context in the startup. So I will go to the configure services section here. I will paste in 2 lines of code. This is obviously not a totally best practice here because I'm hard coding the connection string in the application, but for now it will just serve well. Next, I need to include the Microsoft Entity Framework core namespace here. So I have the use SQL Server extension method available, and I need to resolve the Chinook context, which is somewhere in my application here. All right. So to make sure that everything is set up properly, I can now build the application, and I can now start using one of the very powerful features that come with DevExtreme. What I want is I want a page with a DevExtreme data grid, and it should show all the artists that are in my database. So we'll need a web API endpoint for that, and we need a view that will have a DevExtreme data grid, and then we need to configure the data grid to facilitate the web API endpoint. Well, let me show you how to set it up in just like minutes. First, I will right-click the controllers folder, and I'll go to Add New Scaffolded Item. And in this case, we have a DevExtreme section here, and I can actually select create a DevExtreme API controller with actions using Entity Framework. When I do that, it will ask me a couple of things. And the first thing will be my data context class, which is this one. I was going to deal with artists, which is the model, and the controller name will be the artist controller. So this is something that comes with the .NET framework itself as well, except for the fact that this web API endpoint looks slightly different. So for instance, we have a get which will list the data, and it gets a load options object. And what that means actually is that if we need to get a page of data instead of the whole data set, that will be specified in that load options, and that will be received from the client. It will also hold information about sorted columns, grouped columns, etc. And we have created a data source loader class that can deal with those load options. So that is also that comes with DevExtreme. And the second step here is we now need to create this view. In this case, it's actually a page. So this is not an MVC application, but this is a page-based application, which is a new project template, also again from Microsoft. And what that means is that the index in this case doesn't have a model behind it, but it is just a page that will host a DevExtreme control in this case. And for DevExtreme, that's actually perfect because the controls itself will do all the asynchronous calls to web API endpoints to do whatever they need to do. So yeah, the page is pretty much just an empty container which hosts the control. So how can we set this one up? Well, I'll right-click the pages folder here. I go to new scaffolded item again. And in this case, I will take the second option here, which is the Razor page with the DevExtreme control. And what I can do now is, after it pops up with the questions, I need to give it a name. So I'll give it artists. And I will select the control that I want to be on there. So it's the DevExtreme data grid or the DevExtreme tree list in this case. And again, I need to specify a number of things here, like the DB context, the artist, and the artist controller. And last, I can select a number of options here to do CRUD operations on the grid as well. When I hit add, it will create a page similar to the one you already saw, the index one, except that it will now connect to this artist controller, and this is also something that comes with DevExtreme, and it will configure the grid with the columns that we want. And with this in place, the only thing we pretty much need to do is let me go to the layout and add like an item here. And so in this case we have a couple of items, and I will just copy this one and include an item for the artists. So I'll do that here. Like this. I'll keep the home icon. And this is going to be artists. Like this. All right, so when I run the application again, we'll have the navigation on the left side has been expanded with one item, which is the artist item. And this was still the sample data that comes with the home page. But if I now hit the artist button here, we will now hit the API endpoint that we just created by the scaffolding tool. And we have this data grid with all the artists out of my database. So I'd say this was set up pretty quickly. And it's not only set up in a way that we can actually view the data, we can already start changing data. So I can change the name here, and it's all the update has been sent back to the controller, and it's already persisted in the database. So really easy to get started with the APIs and the DevExtreme controls. All right, so one of the other things that I'd like to talk about, and that has everything to do with the demo that I just created here, is server side. So how does this work? How do we declare controls in Razor? How can I use type lambdas and model validation and so on? And why should I use it? Well, let's get back to the page, and you already noticed a couple of things probably. If I go back to Visual Studio here, and I go to the artist page in this case, what you see here is that in our Razor page we have this DevExtreme extension method. And the DevExtreme extension method is actually the thing that allows us to insert DevExtreme controls. In this case, it's a data grid, but we can also insert whatever control that we want. So for instance, maybe let me do something like this and say HTML. And by the way, this is C#. So the cool thing with Visual Studio is, and particularly C# is that the code completion works really well. So what you see is while I type, I can actually have my code completion just like you were working in code, and I can actually search the control I want to insert. And in this case, I will go for a tag box. And what you also see is that we have set up a really nice Fluent API that allows you to configure this control in a way that you want. So the tag box control needs a data source with items that we can insert, for instance. And so it's got like everything in there, and it even shows you the overloads on this method. And I'll save you a bit of time here by inserting some of my favorite artists here. I'll just insert an array of strings with artists here. And this is actually how simple it is to insert a control manually. If I now hit Control F5 again, you'll see that we have this tag box control together with the artist grid. I mean, there's not any functionality between the two of them, but you could code that in. That wouldn't be a big deal, actually. And so here's the tag box, and I can now select the items. So it's very effective by using our Fluent API, including code completion and everything, to insert other controls that are in the DevExtreme package. One of the other things which you saw here in the Fluent API of the data grid, for instance, is that once we need to add columns, what you'll see is we are actually having lambda expressions available to specify the column name. So instead of using a string which holds the property name of this particular item that you want in the column, you can use a lambda expression. And the benefit of this is that typing errors are something of the past. I mean, because for this, if I would go to this column, I can just hit Control Space, and well, there is no way I'm going to make a typing error here. I can just select Artist ID, and yeah, whenever something changes in your models, you'll still have a compiler error like, okay, that property doesn't exist anymore. And again, also for the columns, we can actually use the Fluent API to, for instance, specify the width here. One of the other things which is very important in a business application is obviously validation. And yeah, you might be familiar with the unobtrusive client-side validation features that come with MVC. Well, you can actually still use them with DevExtreme as well. And by the way, you just saw me change this column width, so it's now looking a bit better here. Well, DevExtreme, as I mentioned, works really well with those unobtrusive validation features as well. And it is just as simple as going to the artist and, for instance, put a required attribute on there. Once I read the application again and I want to change that artist that I just changed, I can actually hit the edit button and let me clean everything up here. If I try to save it, you'll see that it has all been, yeah, it's getting a different background color. That means that the validation has failed. And so this also works really nice with the DevExtreme controls. All right, so then one of the other controls, or two of the controls that we have that I do want to show you, but I will not go over like a lot of details concerning the Office controls because they are quite complex and they've got a lot of features and functionality. But what I will show you is how to set that up in an application and how to start using that. So let me get back to the demo again, and let me add a page here. And I will do this by specifying a razor page, and in this case I will just do an empty page here. They will ask me a couple of things here if I want to have a page model, so that is also something which comes with the razor pages. You could actually have a model behind it if you want to have a view model to bind certain properties to certain things in the page. Well, I don't really care, but let's name it editor and just add it to the project here. Well, once we have that page set up, we can actually go to insert something here. And the most easy way, by the way, is actually to go, let me get one of the pages here. If you go to the gs.devexpress.com site, we have some extensive documentation here. And you can actually see how we do certain things if you want to have certain functionality here. So if I go to the editor, for instance, here we have the editor available. And this is one of the very simple demos that we have. If I switch over to ASP.NET Core, it is just as simple like, okay, so here we have this Fluent API, and we can actually just copy this over in our own page. I could actually remove a couple of items here because I don't need it. This is the toolbar. Maybe I don't need all these features here. And once we have set this up, I can actually hit Control F5 and you'll see that we have the editor available here. Let me go to the editor page. So this is basically how quickly you can have a one of the more complex controls embedded in your application as well. All right. So one of the other controls that we recently introduced is the file manager control. I actually have a very nice demo for that. So let me get that up here. And here it is. And if I run the application, you will have a nice file manager. And while it's still in CTP, it is already quite functional, and it is actually that functional that you can already extend the file manager to use another file system provider as the local file system. And so we have the file manager here, and yeah, you can just create folders, you can navigate through folders, you can upload files, everything works quite well. And the only thing that we have with the file manager right now is it is only available if you are using jQuery. So the integration with .NET Core and MVC, but also the integration with Angular, Vue, and React, which are the other platforms that we support with DevExtreme, is not ready yet because we're still finishing the last bits and pieces on the file manager. But let me show you the page which hosts this control. What you see is that it is absolutely possible to use the jQuery integration in an MVC application as well, because what we do is we connect it again to a web API endpoint, and in this case you might wonder, why does this thing has Azure API controller in there? Well, that's actually the exciting thing that I wanted to show you, because we were just navigating through Azure Blob Storage. Yeah, so this is something which is not out of the box in the controller yet, but one of the developers from the DevExtreme team decided, to create this Azure Blob File Provider class, which allows us to already store files in Azure Blob Storage. And this is available on GitHub. You can just download it and play around with it. And yeah, we'll probably incorporate it somehow in a future version of the file manager by default. But this is something that I thought was really cool to show you, that you can already connect your file manager to, in this case, Azure Blob Storage. Alright, so the last demo that I'm going to give you is one which I think is a really cool one, and it has everything to do with DevExtreme, .NET Core, Angular, and our DevExtreme scaffolding tools. So if you're already working on an Angular application, or maybe you want to get started with it, well, try this technology out because it will save you quite a bit of work. How does this work? Well, let me first open up Visual Studio again and show you how to create a new project, which is an Angular frontend with a Web API backend. And for this, we'll select the ASP.NET Core web application, which gives us the second pop-up where we can specify that we want to create an Angular application. So once I hit OK, we'll have a Web API project. So we have some controllers here, and in this case it's a sample data controller, but also in the same project, and that's actually pretty nice, we have the client app folder, which will contain our Angular application. So if I check out my app folder here, you'll have a couple of components. We've got the app module with all the TypeScript in there. And so this is your Angular front end. All right, so how can we use DevExtreme with this? Let me first build the application, so it's also able to restore all the npm packages that is needed for the application, and afterwards I'll run it so you'll have an impression on what kind of application we're dealing with, in case you haven't tested this yourself. So everything has been downloaded, the project has been created, and well, we can now actually start the application by hitting Control F5 here. And well, it will need a bit of time to actually boot up the application, because it first needs to boot up the Web API application, the server application, and then it needs to load in the Angular front-end application. But once it's all up and running, we'll have our Angular application. And in this case, it is already fetching data from the controller that was configured with the project template. Alright, so before we can continue with something useful here, let me first quickly scaffold that same database that you saw me use before and add it to this project. We can do that by going to the Package Manager console, and I'll give the command scaffold db context with the appropriate options here. So we'll have all the models set up, and well, I obviously need to do the same things as I did before. In this case, I will actually decorate two models correctly here, which is the albums one as well as the artists one. So here we put the key attribute on top of it, and then we need to go to the startup file and we need to initialize the DB context. So let me put that code right in here. And before we can continue, I need to resolve a number of namespaces here. And the Chinook context can be done by resolving it alphabetically here. So that's all set up. Before I start the scaffolder, let me rebuild the application to make sure it is aware of all the changes that I've made. And with this in place, I can pretty much do the same procedure as you saw me do before with the other scaffolding tools. So I'll right click the controllers folder, I go to add a new scaffolded item, and in this case I will create a DevExtreme API controller. We'll get the same questions as we got before. So I need to select the DB context, which is the Chinook. We need to select the model class, in this case the artist, and we need to specify a controller name, which is going to be the artist controller. And while we're at it, I will also create a second controller here. Because I want to show you a very powerful feature here. So if I go to add new scaffolded item again, I'll do another controller, and this is going to be the albums controller. So in this case I'll select album, and the albums controller is fine. Alright, so once this one is set up, we can actually rebuild the application to make sure that it is aware of everything that we have included in the project. And next we can scaffold something in the Angular application. So how does that work? Well, let me just right click the app folder inside my Angular, which is actually your Angular root folder. I can now go to add new scaffolded item again, and in this case, instead of doing the razor page with a DevExtreme control, I can now select the Angular component with a DevExtreme UI widget. And the fun thing that's happening right now is, if you see the options that you get, you might wonder like, hey, I've seen this before, and you're absolutely right. So let me quickly set this stuff up. Artists, like this. I will select the data grid, and I will select my artist model class here. And with this in place, I can select a number of things here. Let me hit add. And well, the first time it will take a bit of time because it needs to download and install the DevExtreme npm packages. And yeah, as I mentioned, this can take up to a minute or so. So once everything has been downloaded and configured, because that's really cool, everything concerning DevExtreme will be configured properly inside your Angular config as well. And in the end, what you'll see is we have an artist folder here, which will hold a typical structure here with the component assets as well as a service file. So if I take a look at the service file, you'll see that we have configured everything here correctly. And also the getArtist method is configured to get those artists. Then in the component TS file, we'll make sure that that data source is going to be injected at runtime according to the Angular infrastructure. And so everything has been set up properly. And one of the really cool things that we have here is the configuration of the data grid. What you see is that we have a very nice Angular integration layer here, because we provide you with all these custom HTML tags that allow you to configure the data grid with all the features that you want. And so very nice done, and this has all been scaffolded. Alright, one of the other things that I'm going to do is I'm going to create that second one as well. So I can right click again, I will go to add new scaffolded item, and I'll pick the same one here. And in this case, instead of doing the artists, it's going to be the albums. So let me change this one to albums. The control will be data grid. Data binding will be based on the album model, and the settings I will put them all on. And as you can see, the scaffolding will take much less time as the first one because we don't need to configure all the npm dependencies, etc. Alright, before we can actually use these views, we need to configure a couple of things. And one of the things is we need to configure the router module to specify a number of endpoints that we can hit to actually go to those views. So let me copy these lines in. I'll change the first one to artist, and I'll do the second one to albums. And in this case, as you can see, that was also the message that you saw in Visual Studio. The components are already registered here and there. So I can actually now copy this one and put it in here. And I can copy this one and put it in here. So the scaffolder has configured everything properly in your application, and it's all ready to use. The last thing I'd like to add is a couple of navigation items, and that can be done in this file here. So we can actually just click in the page and have those items appear. For this, I will also paste in this line twice, and the first one I will change to artists, and let me say artists, and the second one I will change to albums. Let me lowercase that one here, and I will do the same here as well. And with this in place, there is actually one thing that we need to do. And let me first show you what's happening. Because if I now run the application, what you'll see is that we have the same application as you saw before, except it has two extra menu items on the left side, one for the albums and one for the artists. And the interesting part is, and that's exactly why I'm going to show you this error, that the DevExtreme controls provide some useful information in case stuff goes wrong. And as a matter of fact, I know that something is going to be wrong, and we can fix that quite easy. But I thought I'll show that to you anyway. So if I now click my artist menu item here, I will get the data grid and I will get this error message. The artist ID key field is not found in the data objects. Well, what does this mean? This means that we need to change a setting in the Web API application, because from a certain version from .NET Core, the JSON objects that are being sent over, the property names of those objects have some camel case change in lowercase and uppercase characters. So if I would change this A to a small a instead of the uppercase A, then it will work. But then I need to do it with the name as well, and there are a couple of other places where I need to change it. So it would be better if the Web API application doesn't mix up those upper and lowercase things here. Yeah, we can do that by going to the startup file of our backend application. So let me go to the startup class and add an extra configuration here. So let me put the following line in here, which prevents this camel case changing of property names. And this is something, there is documentation about it, it's available as well, but you can actually use this option to change that behavior of changing the cases of property names. And with this in place, I can actually rebuild the application. I have to rebuild it right now. because there is a change in the backend. So let me just do that, and I can now start the application again. And what you'll see is that we have a fully working DevExtreme data grid inside an Angular application, and it will actually persist the data that we might even change to the database backend. So once everything has been booted up, we can now navigate to the artist page without any problems here. Here is the application, and the camel case mixing has been gone away because of the setting that I added, and I can actually now click edit and change a couple of things here, just like that. You see, so this is actually quite simple to get started with Angular and database access, etc. One of the other things that I wanted to show you here is that the albums have an artist. So every artist has one or several albums. And what you see with the albums scaffolding feature is that the scaffolding tool already figured out, like, okay, so there is a one-to-many relationship between albums and artists, and that's exactly why we have the full artist name instead of the artist ID. And it's getting even better, because if I click the edit button here, I have a drop down box that allows me to select another artist here. So I'd say this is very, very cool. And in this case, we'll just have the text box here. And with this, it's already updated in the database as well. So very powerful and very cool feature if you're into Angular development together with .NET Core. And with this, I hope you enjoyed this this webinar, and I would like to thank you for your attention. As you can see, my GitHub account has all the demos that I did in the repo that is on the page. And Amanda, if there are any questions, let me know.
Hey, Don. The team answered all the questions that popped up.
Cool. All right. Well, in that case, I'd like to thank you. And I give it back to you again, Amanda.
No, I'm going to hand it back to you, Don. Just kidding.
Cool.
All right, everybody. Like I mentioned before, today's webinar will be made available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. I will post the link to that in the chat box. While you're on our YouTube channel, please subscribe and ring that little notification bell so that you know when we release new content. You will also get a follow-up email with a link to this webinar recording. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Don. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.